Well, back to the protests in China. This morning, protests were renewed in Guangzhou, one of the regions where they have been pushing back on government's lockdown restrictions, said to be the strictest in the world. Protests have also been recorded in Shanghai and the capital Beijing, where residents support the protests against the lockdown restrictions. All through the week, we have seen protests in New York, in Canada, as well as in Europe, all in support and in solidarity with the Chinese people who are calling on their government to change things. Joining me now is Deputy President, Nigerians in Diaspora Commission in China, Mr. Geoffrey Okpozae. He joins me from Guangzhou, where incidentally there have been protests over this past few days. Geoffrey, thanks for joining me on the program. I know it's midnight there, so I appreciate your making the time to be on the program. I understand the restrictions in China as regards freedom of speech, but what can you tell us regarding the protests in Guangzhou?
Thank you very much for having me here today. As regards the COVID situation in China, currently in Guangzhou there are no protests. However, about a week ago, there is an isolated case protest, and as regards the quarantine in certain region over an extended period of time. So actually this is due to a breakdown in communication between those supervising the quarantine and the people living in those communities. Other parts of Guangzhou are still going about their daily activities. Some districts are quarantined. As cases increase, the government tends to condone such areas so as to limit the rise in infection. So as for Guangzhou, there is no protest. However, the government is trying to do its best to make sure it's not a citywide quarantine.
Let me understand. You're trying to say that some of the pictures we've been seeing online are false. There are no protests in Guangzhou. There have not been any protests against government lockdowns in Guangzhou.
Like I just said, it is an isolated case of a particular neighborhood. It's not a general situation because the first priority for the government is to ensure lives are safe. People do not die from the infection of this COVID virus. So the citizens and everyone though it's an inconvenience to everybody, but since the priority remains saving lives, despite the inconvenience, people tend to actually follow the rules so as to minimize the risk of wider infection.
Can you also confirm that there have been protests across other cities in China? For example, in Shanghai, just wondering, if maybe we should even ask, what the media is portraying to people in China. Are there any reports of the protests at all, whether in Shanghai or in Guangzhou? Well, you said there are none. And then in Beijing and the other parts of China, what is the media telling you in China?
Actually, I have not actually come across any media footage of what happened in Shanghai or in Beijing. However, what happened in Shanghai, it's a little unrelated to, like I said, the isolated protest that happened in Guangzhou last week. What happened in Shanghai was what started as a commiseration of what actually happened in the fire incident in Xinjiang. There is a street named after so many provinces in Shanghai. So people were actually going to commiserate with people who actually lost their lives. And they went with flowers to commiserate, and sometimes in the heat of the moment, and then more people gathered. If you take a look at the video, you will find out that initially the authorities were calm which is quite exceptional. They were calm and they actually allowed them to gather and place flowers there. But at certain time, I think things got overheated. Like I said, it is an isolated incident.
Well, it's easy to understand, how you're interpreting what is seen, because from what I'm hearing you say, there is a blackout, in China of the protests. And that's understandable because some of the protests have been, focused on freedom of speech. People want to be able to express themselves. Somehow the videos of these protests are finding their ways online. And we know that this has to do with the fire at Urumqi, and the government has defended itself on that. But has the government perhaps addressed the impact the lockdown is having on economies? Because I also hear that that's also one of the reasons people are complaining, the fact that businesses have closed, people are economically handicapped at the moment.
Oh, thank you very much. Definitely, there is no way the government can avoid these economic consequences as a result of restrictions in movement, business activities, as well as supply chains generally. However, the government's priority still remains saving lives. And however, like after the long Shanghai down, the government did roll out certain policies for businesses and tax rebates, loan moratorium extensions, and such. However, there are still individuals who are still having difficulties in their businesses. This cannot be avoided. However, the priority remains trying to minimize the impact of the COVID and the COVID policy on zero policy. So I believe one thing about the Chinese government, they are not putting their priority on the economy right now. Their priority, as I see it, is on saving lives. And I believe once they are able to manage the COVID situation, I trust they know how to mobilize resources in trying to ignite their economy again.
Could you describe for us, what a typical lockdown in China looks like? That might help us understand, what's really going on.
All right. If an infection is discovered in a zone or in a district or locality, first of all, they try to isolate that district. That district is isolated, so infection is not spread to other region. Movement is equally restricted, and people are actually advised to quarantine. And then there is the mandatory COVID test. Every individual has to undergo that same day, every day. And these results are actually analyzed, and the community are constantly informed about the results. Actually, every individual has a QR code. We'll call it a health code. So you will immediately be able to know if you've been infected. And whenever a district is actually condoned as an infected zone, that region usually the movements of people and other kind of activities are completely restricted.
How does that happen? How does the restriction happen? Do you have security? Do you have police on the streets preventing people from moving from one place to another? Because we understand China has a zero COVID policy, meaning that even if one person is infected in a region or in a community, then the whole community is under lockdown. Everyone is quarantining. So what does, the restriction really look like? Do you have police preventing people from leaving their homes to go places, or what exactly happens?
Or in most cases, actually, we do not actually need the police to enforce such kind of quarantine or restrictions. Usually, the estate management communities, usually they are actually the ones who enforce such kind of restrictions in and out, or people are not allowed to come in and people are not allowed to go out, or you are expected to remain indoors in your apartment. Only times when we have to go downstairs or outside for a COVID test. But you really do not, in the major cities I'm talking about, you really do not have police enforcing such laws. Like I said, people are actually compliant with this zero COVID policy because they too equally understand it is for a purpose. However, we cannot take out the inconveniences these has actually has on people, but since this is the first of its kind, people are gradually adjusting to it, yes.
And how would you say the Nigerian community in China is adjusting to the restrictions? I'm sure the businesses have been affected. What are you hearing from your fellow colleagues?
Yeah, that's a unique one. Looking into the zero COVID policy, it's a policy that actually affects everyone, irrespective of nationality. However, in Guangzhou, it's quite peculiar as many Nigerians who live on the southern part of China, these are mostly exporters and traders in small merchandises. So since major markets are actually closed down, and it is the Xmas season as well. So these individuals have been having troubles trying to secure the right merchandise that they can actually be able to deal with their clients back home. And for university students, their only frustration is they've actually been restricted to their campuses, but they actually get all basic amenities there, just that they are not allowed to leave their campuses. Other than that, mostly daily activities is disrupted for these Nigerians who this is their only source of living, but they are trying to adapt with the online kind of procurement as well too. But the inconveniences are still there for everyone.
Feeling, I know it took a lot to get you to say some of these things. I also understand how careful you're being because of China, but we do appreciate your coming on the show, and thank you for informing us about the Nigerian community in China. We do hope that things work out well eventually. We'll keep our eyes on developments out of Guangzhou, especially because you're there. And thank you again for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me, Amarachi.